In the city of Abuja, where life moved at a frantic pace, there was a hospital that had become the center of whispered stories. St. Martin's Medical Center was an ordinary hospital on the outside, modern facilities, busy corridors, and the constant flow of patients in and out. But for the people who worked there, one name carried an air of mystery and dread: Dr. Olumide Adegoke. Dr. Adegoke was a well-known surgeon, famous for his precision in the operating room and his cold, almost robotic demeanor. Patients respected him, as did his colleagues, but there was something about him that people couldn't quite place. His sharp eyes always seemed to watch with an intensity that unnerved both patients and staff. He was quiet, efficient, and never socialized. But what really set him apart was his absolute lack of compassion. Over the years, the staff at St. Martin's began to notice a disturbing pattern in his behavior. It started with small things. Nurse Amaka, one of the senior nurses, had been working with Dr. Adegoke for almost 5 years, and in all that time, she had never once seen him comfort a patient. When a young boy came in with severe burns after a gas explosion, Dr. Adegoke performed the surgery with his usual skill, but when the boy cried out in pain, he barely blinked. Amaka remembered vividly how he had dismissed the boy's mother's desperate questions with a cold, "He'll be fine. He's lucky to be alive." That was Dr. Adegoke's way. His patients survived, but there was no warmth, no humanity in his treatment. He saw people as problems to solve, not lives to save. But the real trouble began when his surgeries started to have unexpected complications that, in the eyes of the medical staff, seemed a little too frequent to be coincidence. One day, a prominent businessman, Mr. Okafor, was scheduled for a routine gallbladder surgery. It was supposed to be a simple procedure, one Dr. Adegoke had performed countless times before. But something went wrong. Mr. Okafor came out of surgery in critical condition, having lost an alarming amount of blood. The nurses were baffled, as the operation should have been straightforward. Dr. Adegoke gave no explanation beyond the usual post-surgery briefing, leaving the staff confused and worried. Whispers began to spread among the hospital staff. Some said Dr. Adegoke had grown careless. Others believed he was intentionally causing harm. Nurse Amaka couldn't shake the feeling that there was something darker behind his cold exterior. She decided to do some investigating of her own. Amaka started paying closer attention to the patients who came under Dr. Adegoke's care. She noticed a pattern. Many of the patients who experienced complications were older, wealthy individuals. And while the official records showed no irregularities, she began to hear rumors from the families of these patients, rumors that they had paid large sums of money to Dr. Adegoke for guaranteed successful surgeries. One night, after a particularly long shift, Amaka was tidying up the nurses' station when she overheard two junior doctors talking in hushed tones. "I'm telling you, something's off with Dr. Adegoke," one of them whispered. "I was in the OR last week, and I swear he deliberately delayed closing up that patient." "You think he's doing it on purpose?" the other doctor asked, incredulous. The first doctor nodded. "It's always the same kind of patients, wealthy, older, high profile. And they never fully recover. Something's not right." Amaka's heart raced as she listened. She had suspected something for a while, but hearing it confirmed by others made her blood run cold. She knew she had to act, but she also knew that accusing a surgeon as renowned as Dr. Adegoke was dangerous. Without solid proof, no one would believe her, and she could lose her job, or worse. A few weeks later, an opportunity presented itself. An elderly woman named Mrs. Lawal was admitted for a hip replacement surgery. She was wealthy, well known in the community, and, unfortunately, under the care of Dr. Adegoke. Amaka had a bad feeling about it from the start. On the day of the surgery, Amaka made sure she was assigned to the operating room. She watched closely as Dr. Adegoke performed the procedure. Everything seemed normal at first, but then she noticed something strange. During a critical part of the surgery, Dr. Adegoke hesitated, just for a second, but long enough for her to notice. It was as if he was purposely making a minor mistake. Amaka's heart pounded as she watched. Could it be intentional? Was he doing this on purpose to complicate the recovery and ensure that Mrs. Lawal would need more surgeries? She didn't say anything at the time, but she made a mental note of the exact moment and the exact step of the procedure. After the surgery, Mrs. Lawal's condition was stable, but her recovery was slower than expected. Dr. Adegoke dismissed it as a normal complication, but Amaka wasn't convinced. She began quietly gathering information, talking to other nurses and junior doctors who had worked with Dr. Adegoke. Slowly, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Patients under his care often experienced unusual complications, but only those who were wealthy or had high social status. The poorer patients, the ones who couldn't afford private consultations or special fees, seemed to recover without issue. Amaka realized that Dr. Adegoke was manipulating his surgeries for personal gain. By causing complications in wealthy patients, he ensured that they would need further treatments and surgeries, treatments that he would personally oversee and charge exorbitant fees for. He was exploiting the trust of his patients and using their misfortune to line his pockets. Amaka knew she had to act, but she needed solid evidence. One night, she snuck into the hospital's records room and found the files for some of Dr. Adegoke's recent patients. As she suspected, there were discrepancies in the medical records, small changes in the procedure notes, alterations to post-op care instructions. It wasn't much, but it was enough to suggest foul play. With the files in hand, Amaka approached Dr. Ibrahim, the hospital's chief medical officer. She was nervous, but she knew she couldn't let Dr. Adegoke continue to harm patients. Dr. Ibrahim listened carefully to her concerns and agreed to launch a quiet investigation. Over the next few weeks, the hospital conducted a thorough audit of Dr. Adegoke's surgeries. What they found confirmed Amaka's worst fears. Dr. Adegoke had been intentionally complicating surgeries for financial gain, exploiting vulnerable patients and manipulating their outcomes to his advantage. When confronted, he denied everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Adegoke was quietly suspended, and soon after, his medical license was revoked. The news of his downfall spread quickly through the medical community, and while many were shocked, those who had worked closely with him were not surprised. Amaka, though shaken by the experience, was proud that she had stood up for the patients and exposed the truth. But the memory of Dr. Adegoke's cold, calculating eyes haunted her long after he was gone. The hospital resumed its normal operations, but the scars of his betrayal lingered. And Amaka never forgot the lesson she had learned, that even in a profession built on trust and compassion, darkness could still find a way in.